Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this special report, this special edition, Armenian Genocide, Iowa and Nebraska and their recognition of this tragic crime. How can we bring this now to a future of peace and respect for religious freedom? I'm John Jacobsen today, and we're going to be taking a look at an incredibly sad time in Christian history, a sad time in world history, a time that has been so ugly that many have tried to bury it and sweep it under the rug and not even look and reflect at it. And that is the Armenian Genocide. And we're so grateful to have with us today probably one of the nation's top scholars on the Armenian Genocide. We have with us today Mr. Armen Sahakian. He's the executive director of the Eurasian Research and Analysis Institute, specializing in geopolitical, socioeconomic, and security affairs of the Eurasian region. He is the author of over 20 different academic articles and has presented his research at several conferences, including at Georgetown University, American Benefit Cost Analysis Society, and Northeast Political Science Association. In the past, Mr. Sahakian has served as an advisor to the permanent representative of the Republic of Armenia to the United Nations in New York, as well as a research associate at the European Institute in Washington, D.C. He holds a Master of Arts degree in International Relations and International Economics from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, where he was also the vice president of the Russia and Eurasia Club. Mr. Sahakian received his BA in International Political Economy from Bloomfield College, graduating summa cum laude and as the valedictorian of the class. Welcome, Mr. Sahakian.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Jacobsen. It's an honor to be here.
Mr. Sahakian, you're one of the leading scholars and one of the wave of younger scholars that has done a brilliant job of bringing this to the forefront where it's really never been that much. We'll talk about a few things down the line here that go back to our culture and its ties over here to Armenia. A lot of people don't realize that awareness, that the awakening is beginning to occur. You were part of a big such event that is occurring in Iowa the month of October. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, absolutely. Well, firstly, allow me to thank you for, again, having me on the show and for your very gracious introduction. I was, as you mentioned, honored and privileged to be present at the governor's formal office just about a couple of weeks ago, where she signed a proclamation officially affirming and condemning the Armenian Genocide.
Indeed, you were there. You've been a big catalyst for that. Let's get right to the rub of it, Armen. What is the Armenian Genocide? Let's put this in a historical context, both in terms of time and just the colossal gravity of the evil tragedy that really, I say, was the precursor. It was the precursor, the first real genocide of the 20th century that was the precursor for what Hitler and other genocidalists have done ever since.
Yes, absolutely. So when we talk about the Armenian Genocide, many scholars consider this the first such instance of international crime in modern history. So there was not anything like this prior to the Armenian Genocide, and so many would dub it as the first genocide of the modern times. It started in 1915 in the Ottoman Turkish Empire, where the Young Turk government that came into power about a year earlier decided that all the indigenous Christian populations of the Ottoman Empire, which included the Armenians, the Greeks, and the Assyrians, were an existential threat to the viability. And so they started the systematic plan to exterminate all of these indigenous Christian populations. When we talk numerically, we're speaking of more than 2 million people that were killed, massacred during this time period. In the case of the Armenians, there were about 2.2 million citizens of the Ottoman Empire, and about 1.5 million of them were massacred. So over 2/3 of the entire Armenian population of the Ottoman Empire was annihilated by 1923. So within an 8-year period, the entire population was either exterminated or they were driven out of their ancestral homelands into Syria, into Greece, and other parts of the world.
This is really incredible. 2 million people extinguished right around the time of the World War I era. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Sahakian, it was the Armenian Genocide that was the genesis for the word genocide itself. Genocide had not been a vocabulary word in the lexicon, that word was essentially created to recognize the gravity of that situation.
Yes, you're absolutely right in that. Actually, what is interesting is that when the Armenian Genocide was happening, and as you correctly pointed out, this was taking place during World War I, the Germans and the Ottomans were allied during this time period. So many German officers were actually also involved in essentially guiding the Turkish gendarmerie on how they would most effectively, quote unquote, kill a whole population. Because as you can imagine, it's really not an easy task to kill millions of people. I mean, it takes a lot of resources, especially when the country is also engaged in a war. And so there was no such term because this was, again, the first time such an international crime took place. And so it was not until actually towards the end of World War II when Raphael Lemkin, a professor at Duke University, coined the term genocide. It took two words, genos, which means, I think, a race, and side, which means killing. So killing of a race. And so when he described this in his writings and in his public talks, which I believe there's even some clips available on YouTube and online, he talked about what happened to the Armenian people and the Jewish people during the Holocaust as instances that would describe a genocide. Because he said, the words extermination or annihilation or massacre just did not fully capture the magnitude of such crime. And the reason why I brought up the Germans being involved during World War I is because the commander of the Auschwitz camp during the Holocaust did, during the Nuremberg trials, confess that he first got his, experience, for the lack of a better term, in terms of, committing such crimes in the Ottoman Empire against the Armenian, Greek, and Assyrian people. Another interesting point I want to raise over here is our U.S. ambassador, Henry Morgenthau, that was stationed in Constantinople. He was also very much outspoken about this, and he did send telegrams at the time to the State Department talking about an entire he said an annihilation of an entire race is underway. So, everybody at the time did realize that this is something completely different than what, maybe humanity had experienced previously. So there was a need of such a coining of a term.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're very honored to have with us Armen Sahakian. He, among other things, is the Eastern Region board member for the Armenian National Committee to America. And we will be back in 1 minute, and we will focus on some great things going on in both Nebraska and Iowa to recognize this human evil and, again, to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And furthermore, its relevance to today. Unfortunately, we're seeing some of these same types of actions happening to Christians in the Middle East today. So stay tuned. We'll be back in 1 minute on Special Report with John Jacobsen. Welcome back to our special report on the Armenian Genocide. It was the precursor for the remainder of the genocides of this century and now into the 21st century, sadly, tragically, and we must recognize this evil to prevent it in the future. We've got one of the nation's foremost experts on the issue, Armen Sahakian, here. Armen, you were at the Capitol for this signing ceremony. You were standing at the right hand of the governor when she made these remarks.
Welcome to the Governor's Formal Office for Armenia Awareness Month, and we will do the official proclamation, and then we'll sign it and we'll get an official photo. So, whereas from 1915 to 1923, during the Armenian Genocide, 1.5 million ethnic Armenian men, women, and children, as well as over 1 million Greeks, Assyrians, Syriacs, and others were massacred as part of the planned, complete eradication of the indigenous communities of the Ottoman Turkish Empire during the first modern genocide that still requires justice. And whereas the United States House of Representatives has adopted H-Crime Resolution 75, declaring the atrocities perpetrated by ISIL against Christians and other religious and ethnic minorities in Iraq and Syria war crimes against humanity, and genocide. And whereas by recognizing and consistently remembering the Armenian Genocide, the Holocaust, and all cases of past and ongoing genocide, we help protect historic memory, ensure that similar atrocities do not occur again, and remain vigilant against hatred, persecution, and tyranny. Now therefore I, Kim Reynolds, Governor of the State of Iowa, do hereby proclaim the month of October 2017 as Armenia Awareness Month.
That's Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds, signing for this month of October, Armenian Recognition Month in Iowa. And what delights me so much, Armin Sahakian, I'm a brand new member of the Iowa legislature, but even one of my most liberal counterparts in the legislature, a fellow colleague, Art Stade from Cedar Rapids, he was there at that signing ceremony. This is a very bipartisan effort, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. For us, it's actually a nonpartisan issue. I would say it's more of an issue of justice, of reconciliation, of healing, and of peace and truth. So we are very much grateful to all of our supporters on all sides of the aisle for their tremendous help and assistance with bringing about awareness for this very important issue.
Armin Sahakian here with us, board member of ANCA and scholar on the Armenian Genocide. Armin, as we're visiting here, Iowans and Nebraskans, which comprise the majority of our listenership, we're part of the Armenian relief effort and have had some recognized efforts for their decency before, haven't they?
Yes, absolutely. That is actually one of the proudest moments in all of American history, actually. As I mentioned, Ambassador Henry Morgenthau earlier, as he was sending telegrams to the State Department shortly thereafter under the direction of President Woodrow Wilson, his advisor Cleveland Dodge and a few others started an organization originally branded as the American Committee for the Armenian and Syrian Relief. This is in a way was an effort by the American people to try to, in certain ways, help the suffering Armenians, Greeks, and Assyrians during the Armenian Genocide. And although at first they had put a very modest, a plan in front of them to raise about $100,000, and then they later raised it to about $30 million, they ended up raising over $117 million, which in current dollars would amount to about $2.7 billion. So this was very much an unprecedented effort by the American people themselves. First time in history, I have to mention as well that the U.S. got involved half world away in helping suffering people. And later, this committee was renamed as the Near East Relief. It was a congressionally mandated organization, which, by the way, exists to this very day as the Near East Relief Foundation. So the Near East Relief operated from about 1915 to 1930, and they provided with tremendous support to the suffering survivors. And if not for the American relief, I would argue that the majority of the survivors would have died as well, and we would have probably almost no Armenians left on the face of this earth. So the Armenian people still remember; they are still very grateful to the American philanthropy at the time. And of course, Iowa, Nebraska, and all the other states of the Union were very much involved in this process as well. This was not the government sending taxpayer money over. This was very much a crowdfunding effort by the American people themselves that would very much rival the outpouring of support that came after 9/11 attacks in New York City. The amount of outpouring of support and information that was shared. Just to give you a couple of quick statistics.
Yes.
Just in the period of about 1890 to 1923, so between what is known the Hamidian massacres against the Armenians, which preceded the Armenian Genocide, until the end of the genocide, in Iowa and Nebraska collectively, the newspapers carried close to 4,000 articles about the massacres. I'm not even talking about national, New York Times or others. Just the local or state level newspapers such as the Des Moines Register, Des Moines Tribune, or Omaha Daily Bee, the Red Cloud Chief. I mean, you name it. There are thousands and thousands of articles. And one would argue that the people of Nebraska and Iowa and all of the U.S. probably knew much more about Armenia back then than they do today, which is a bit ironic to some extent. I remember reading some accounts where people argued that the American people knew about Armenia second to England, which is quite interesting as well. Anyhow, but again, Iowa and Nebraska played very instrumental roles in saving the Armenians, and I can give you just a few interesting episodes from that. For example, in Clay County in Iowa, Miss Glee Hastings was a dedicated volunteer for the Near East Relief. And the people of the county actually established what was known as the Glee Hastings Orphanage Fund, where they would donate food and money and clothing that would go to save the orphans.
Tremendous.
One very, very big effort was undertaken by Dr. Kirby of Des Moines in 1921, where they had what was known as the Great Corn Campaign. So alongside with Kansas, Nebraska, and Illinois, Iowa also partook in this, and the farmers collectively donated about 413 carloads of corn, and then they donated an additional $60,000 to buy extra corn at the market price that would be sent to the Near East into the American-sponsored orphanages. Actually, over 400 of these to save the starving survivors. And there were also screenings of what was a movie known as Alice in Hungerland, talking about the suffering of the Armenians and others that would also raise money. And there were many, many other examples in both states and throughout the nation. School children even donating their toys. American people, the first Sunday of every December, would observe what was known as the Golden Day Sunday, where they would eat only one meal for that day that would resemble the food that the kids would eat in the orphanages, and then they would effectively donate the difference between their orphanage meal and the meal that they would have had that day to the Near East Relief Fund. So this was a crowdfunding campaign that raised in modern currency close to $3 billion.
Amazing.
And to me, that is really something really astonishing. So the way we hear about the attacks and the genocide against our Christian brethren and other minorities in Syria and Iraq at the hands of ISIS, that was very much part of the daily local news of every single Iowan or Nebraskan and every American.
It's a tremendous point. Here with Armen Sahakian, yes, these were our Christian brothers and sisters being murdered in large part for their faith over there in the Ottoman Empire. We're going to come back in a few minutes with more with Armen Sahakian. There's another very famous Armenian American who's still seen every night on MeTV, a very popular regional television station on Cox Communications, ran 8 seasons, 4 Emmy Award nominations, a Golden Globe for Mike Connors, and Mike Connors, whose birth name was Krekor Ohanian. We'll talk about Mike Connors and some of the other cultural impacts of Armenia on the United States when we're back in 1 minute. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Not only a show that I watched, but a show that all of our folks watched. Mannix won many awards, including for Gail Fisher as Peggy, African-American actress, one of the first with a recurring role. She won an Emmy for the show. Lalo Schifrin with a great musical score. 8 seasons, 9 years, and Krekor Ohanian as Mike Connors. He, in the show, during various episodes, spoke fluent Armenian, and also that was part of the storyline, his Armenian ancestry and that of his father. Now, Armen Sahakian, the nation's foremost expert, I would argue, on the Armenian genocide with us today. Armen, you're too young to remember Joe Mannix, aren't you?
Yes, I am a bit young.
Well, let's go back to a couple things in history here. You know, we were talking during the break, and there was a beautiful, although horrifically tragic book written by Aurora Mardiganian. Arshales, I believe, is her formal first name. She went by Aurora Mardiganian. She wrote in 1918 a book called Ravished Armenia, the story of Aurora Mardiganian, the Christian girl who survived the Great Massacre. And of course, that was later turned into a film in 1919 called The Auction of Souls. And what happened to the Armenian people was so brutal, that movie even had to sanitize some of the killing. Can we talk about the new movie, The Promise? And Armen, why did it take a century to get another movie made to impact the culture on the Armenian genocide?
That is a very good question, Mr. Jacobsen. Actually, one of the biggest problems the Armenian Americans have been facing is the gag rule exerted by the government of the Republic of Turkey regarding this issue, because as you may know, the Turkish government to this very day vehemently denies that any of these crimes ever took place. So while there have been attempts in the past by the Hollywood to produce movies relating to the Armenian genocide, they have been shut down through a very great pressure applied by the government of Turkey against us. So finally, we were able to produce the movie The Promise, which I think was $100 million, had a $100 million budget, but it was self-financed by the late philanthropist billionaire Kirk Kerkorian, who is dubbed as the Godfather or the father of Las Vegas.
Right.
So
a lot of people recognize his name. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So he put the money out of his pocket so that he did not have to deal with, the finances in Hollywood, and then again the Turkish government coming and trying to sabotage the whole process. And then what the Turkish government did is they self-funded another rival movie called The Ottoman Lieutenant, which would then go about and tell an alternative and false story about the Armenian Genocide, how it was just such a tragedy and everyone suffered on all sides of the aisle, and it was not a systematic attempt by the Turkish government to annihilate any of its people. So the Turkish government to this very day takes great lengths to deny the Armenian Genocide, to sabotage other governments, other nations in trying to speak the truth about this. So that's the biggest reason. But thankfully, the Promise was released. It had an excellent release week, and it was screened nationwide in many of the movie theaters. And then there's actually another movie coming out. It's called The Architects of Denial, which pretty much connects the Armenian Genocide to what is happening now in the world. So there's essentially The Promise broke a lot of barriers, and now we're seeing a lot more documentaries and feature films coming out on this issue. And so, yeah, we're very happy about all of these developments.
It's amazing to me that the United States has not formally recognized the genocide. It's a point of shame, I think, for the Obama administration. One of the ex-administration officials said that was the thing that she felt sorriest about. I'm glad the Vatican has obviously recognized the genocide. 47 United States have recognized the genocide. The facts are out there. Aurora's book talked about the 16 girls that she saw that were raped and stripped and essentially impaled on small spiked crosses. These innocents that were murdered largely for their faith and in part their ethnicity, but this genocide against Christians continues to this day over in the Middle East, doesn't it, Armen Sahakian?
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Jacobsen, and that is really something that breaks many of the Armenians' hearts because we know what our forefathers went through. Virtually every Armenian you would meet in your daily lives would be a direct descendant of the survivors, including myself. My great-grandparents actually miraculously escaped the genocide themselves. And so many of them actually ended up finding refuge in Syria and Iraq and Lebanon and other parts of the Middle East. And the Arab people were actually very welcoming of the Armenians at the time, and if not for their hospitality as well, many of the Armenians would have perished. So many Christians, including Assyrians and Greeks, also found refuge in parts of the world where we are now once again witnessing the very same genocide taking place at the hands of, radical Islamic terrorists, that is ISIS and all of the linked forces there. And, we're talking about third, fourth generation genocide survivors who are once again undergoing all of these brutalities. And it is, especially heartbreaking for us because we know what type of a suffering that is. And if you were to trace this back, I would say it is really the impunity of the Turkish government that has resulted in all of these tragedies from happening. As Governor Reynolds, to whom we are extremely grateful for making Iowa number 47 state in the union in recognizing officially the Armenian Genocide.
Right, you're appreciative to Governor Reynolds, and we're so appreciative to you, Armen Sahakian. Armen is the Eastern Region Board member for the Armenian National Committee of America, ANCA, and he is the executive director of the Eurasian Research and Analysis Institute. And Armen, how can folks, you have a magnificent treasure trove of information. For instance, all these Nebraska contributions, as you said, the Omaha Bee, the articles there, the relief efforts that Nebraskans undertook, that Iowans undertook. You can find so much of this. You have a magnificent website out there. How can they learn more about the Armenian Genocide that was perpetrated against our Christian brothers and sisters a century ago, and sadly and tragically and under the forces of evil seems to be happening yet again today in the Middle East to different people, albeit, again, innocent Christians? Where can they find out more information?
Absolutely. I mean, some of the quickest places to find information would be our website, anca.org, which stands for Armenian National Committee of America. We also have put together a website called americawethankyou.org that talks about the nearest relief and the American philanthropy in saving the survivors of the genocide. There is genocidediary.org that actually features newspaper articles from all the states talking about the Armenian massacres, and we have a team that is working on populating the website on a regular basis so that we have it as complete as possible. And we're talking about close to 25,000 articles just in an 8-year period that were published in America. So this is a very huge undertaking. We also have a group in Iowa, actually called Iowans for Armenia, that is trying to continue the legacy of this great philanthropy in the state of Iowa, and to remind people of what amazing things took place back 100 years ago. And so we are very thankful to also some of our coalition partners who have more information, such as the Philos Project, the Iraqi Christian Relief Fund, as I mentioned, the Iowans for Armenia, as well as Hellenic American Leadership Council and A Demand for Action. So there's a lot of resources out there that people can go and learn more about, but some of the websites I pointed out would be the best ones to start with, in addition to many books and articles, et cetera, that are also out there in the world.
Scholar and advocate Armen Sahakian here with us, folks, doing a beautiful presentation. And again, he points to the precursor for all of the terrible genocidal action. It began with the Armenian Genocide in the early 20th century. Sadly, Hitler used that as his motivation for his genocide. And of course, we've had subsequent ones continuing horrifically to this day in the Middle East against our Christian brothers and sisters. Armen, we would love to have you back for a return engagement. Would you like to join us again in a few weeks for another chat?
It would be my privilege, absolutely.
All right, folks, there you have it. Thanks for joining us today on this special report. As I always sign off, be safe, be smart, be good, be strong, and love Jesus. Thank you, everybody, for listening today. God bless us, everyone. Best to Armen Sahakian and all the good folks over there at ANCA. And we'll be back in the future with another special report. This is John Jacobsen. Good day.